Well, thank you all for joining me. I'm Josie Foss, the Executive Director of the Progress and Poverty Institute here in Princeton. I'm joined today by two of our grant recipients who have recently completed a research project that we're going to talk about today. With me is Dr. Nestor Garza. He's an associate professor at the College of Business Administration and Public Policy at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and also Professor Jose Navarro Martinez, who's a professor of economics, also at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Thank you both so much for joining me. So today we're going to talk about a research project that you just completed, which is titled Proposition 13 and the Implicit Subsidy to Housing Prices in Los Angeles County. So at the Progress and Poverty Institute, we think and talk about Prop 13 quite a bit, but not everybody does. So can you talk a little bit about Proposition 13, what it does, and why it was implemented in California to begin with?
Would you like to go ahead, Jose?
Yeah, very general terms, it's a proposition that it was supposed to provide some tax relief to homeowners in California back in the 70s. And the basic idea behind this proposal was to, in a way, freeze the increments in the property taxes that the homeowners pay by limiting how much they can go up year by year. So the limit was supposed to be 2% in the annual cap. So the idea was, again, to provide some relief to homeowners that maybe saw that property taxes were going up faster than that. So in theory, it was supposed to be good for homeowners in all California.
Yeah, that it makes sense on paper. But what was the research question or questions you were exploring, and what methodology did you use for this project?
Perhaps I'll go about that. Essentially, the research question is this. As we heard, this Proposition 13 sounds good in paper, but in practice it ends up producing a tremendous amount of problems. Lack of rotation of real estate, essentially lack of supply. And whenever there's lack of supply, prices are higher. So it makes housing and all the real estate more unaffordable. Now, this shouldn't be too much of an issue if it's a natural market result, but it's not. It's the effect of this distortionary tax. Now, how is our methodology? We use a panel regression or system panel regression to detect the order of causality between two key ratios. The ratio between total cadastral value in land to total cadastral value in improvements, and another ratio is the ratio between total cadastral value, land and improvements together, against market value. Turns out, after 50 years of Proposition 13, there's a tremendous difference, a tremendous gap between the market price of housing and whatever it's assessed at. Because the Proposition 13 kicks in the moment you buy a housing unit, for example, and stays low until you sell it or change use. This incentivizes homeowners to never change use and basically to never sell. So the region is almost static in terms of housing rotation, which adds to other problems, for example, zoning or limiting zoning, to increase the price of land and the price of housing in the region. So we use a panel system estimation to detect that.
Okay, so clearly impacts on housing affordability as a result of this policy. Did you sort of explore the order of magnitude of these impacts in terms of numerical effects on the difference between assessed and sales prices?
Sure, I think I'm going to go on that. For example, we use our estimations to represent the effect of a hypothetical split rate tax that emphasizes land value instead of total value, including improvements in land. And we detected that if the Proposition 13 were changed to a situation like that, we could decrease the average housing unit value right now of $1,020,000, which for United States standards, that's stratospheric, to 764,000. Still very high, but perhaps closer to the income level of the region, to the income level of potential demand. So it's a significant effect. We're talking about one point of the structural difference between cadastral land value and cadastral improvements value.
Wow, that's incredible. So that was the effect that you predicted if you were to switch to a split rate tax in lieu of.
Exactly. It's one of our simulations in the paper.
That's significant. One of the things that you also touched on in the work was the contribution of Proposition 13 to wealth inequality in the state of California. Who's most affected by this? Did you find particular constituents who were worse off because of this?
Well,
Um, if I may, well, based on our analysis, our one of our deductions is that it tends to benefit the most or more than proportionally high income zones, high income households. So if it represents a benefit to some extent to homeowners, it is more than proportional to high income areas and high income households. So that means that the areas that benefit less are lower income areas and lower income households. And not only that, we have to remember that there's another population that is not even part of our sample, is the people that are looking for homes, but they cannot afford a house because of the high prices. So those are the ones that actually affected the most. But again, they're not in our sample because they're not homeowners, so they're not able to afford because Proposition 13 makes prices higher, especially in high income areas.
So a lot of downsides. But the policy obviously has its proponents as well, and you may have alluded to some of who those people are, but who's in favor of this policy? Because I know not everybody dislikes it.
you go or I go, Jose?
And you can go, Nestor.
Okay, the ones who are mostly in favor are current homeowners in high price areas. Those are the ones who benefit the most and see it visually expressed in the property tax bills. They see that the proposition really improves their capacity, their purchasing power, while increasing the value of their homes. So these groups are overrepresented in politics at the state level and at the city level, which means nobody really wants to change this. And the way they portray it is with slogans like this. Proposition 13 helps the elderly who are in their homes that they acquired with their hard work 50 years ago. It's very difficult from a political point of view to say no to that, no? Because whoever says that from whatever political party they come from are horrible monsters who hate the hardworking Americans who built their houses with their effort years ago. So it's very, very contentious, very difficult to say anything about it without sounding revolutionary or extremist in some way.
Yeah, and it's also Proposition 13 becomes effectively an obstacle for rotation, home rotation, household rotation, and also for development. So the areas, high income areas that don't want to see that development happening, they actually benefit the most. So they will definitely be in favor of something like Proposition 13 because it restricts development and it lowers the tax property that they have to pay.
Okay,
And in fact,
that
go
does
ahead.
make sense.
If I may go a bit further, it's not part of our research, but it's part of the background literature on this topic. Many analysts have checked what really happened back in the 70s. And sure, the argument was prices are increasing very quickly, assessments were increasing very quickly, people were increasing their assessment they pay, the cadastral tax they pay very quickly. Maybe that was true, but it's clear that those tax strikes of 1976, 1974 started when the city unified the school district in the entire city of Los Angeles. The unification of the school district really unleashed these concerns. So sure, it might have been related to the amount they were paying in property taxes back then, but it also had socioeconomic and sociodemographic connotations back then. Many people oppose that level of sociodemographic integration and search this way to fight it back with the property taxes.
Yeah.
That's not part of our research, but it's part of the literature on the topic.
That's really helpful context. You've talked a little bit, obviously, about politics and tax policy is inherently political. In your findings, and we already touched a little bit on split rate taxation as a possible remedy to some of the issues that Proposition 13 has created. But you suggested that that might be a more politically viable alternative than some of the others that could be on the table. I'm super interested to hear your thoughts on that and why you think that it might be more feasible.
Should I go or should you go, Jose?
Oh, you can go, Nestor.
Okay. The reason why we think a split rate taxation focusing on land might be less politically opposed than simply update everybody and re-update all the assessment is that when we re-update all the assessments, the opponents are going to come back with the argument that it harms older households who might be asset rich but income poor, and they might have a point there. So if we say that it affects only land, we're giving you the out. We're giving you the out with improvements. As long as you invest in improvements, you will be okay because we're not taxing your improvements. And the state of California has released at the state level many limitant zoning characteristics from the past. For example, you can build an additional unit. Right now, it's basically free at the state level. So you work in improvements with the additional unit or rebuild your entire plot of land or participate in an associated development to redevelop entire blocks, don't worry. Your investment, your improvements, your hard work are never taxed. Only the land, which is a financial asset, by definition, is entirely socially created, not created by the hard work of these hardworking Americans who have accumulated the improvements. So insist on the improvements to sound less harsh. And it's true, the improvements are the product of industry, of the entrepreneurship of the person, not the land value, as we all know, according to theory and according to empirics on the topic. It's not true. The land is purely socially created, the land value or the land rent, more specifically.
We talk to people about that quite a bit because we do a lot of work on split rate taxation. And it makes intuitive sense. And it also doesn't necessarily jibe with Americans' understanding of property ownership and the way that taxation should and should not work. Um, as I'm sure you know, property taxes are under fire in a number of states at the moment, right? We have places as diverse as Florida and Maine having conversations about whether they even need property taxes. So having just completed this research, and honestly, a lot of other jurisdictions look at Proposition 13 as a potential model. What would you advise to policymakers in other jurisdictions based on the work that you've just completed?
If I may, I'll say the recommendation is just not to look at property taxes or property taxation just as a means to collect revenues. Is also related to urban planning. It has explicit effects on how areas can be developed, but also it has some unintended consequences that actually you might not see them right now, but down the road it might show up like Proposition 13. The actual effects were not immediate, but through the years. So when you consider something like a modifying the way that properties are taxed, you should consider not just the short run implications, but also the long run implications, and to consider that you are thinking about not just collecting revenue, but basically doing urban planning, and that's gonna be basically for a long, long time, not just today's finances. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians will just capitalize on today's news, what is happening today, and we have very little interest as public to what's going to happen in 10, 20 years down the road.
That's really good advice. So thinking about the signals that you're sending to the market in general through your tax policy and recognizing that this is not one and done. This is a long-term kind of effort that they're
Yeah.
engaging in. My last question for you all, where do you go from here with this research or research inspired by this work?
Well, this paper that we just completed for the Institute is the first version or a very first approach that we have tried. It makes sense already. It produces reasonable results. It proves our theoretical framework. But in the future, we would like to go further. We would like to take the same information and operate at the level of census tracts. So we can accurately operate with like 600 points in the entire region and include the entire region in the analysis. The only problem with that is that the property tax is at the level of cities, and cities do not coincide with census tracts. So that will be an extra work that we have to perform. But the results we have obtained so far are encouraging to send us in that direction to perform that new paper, that new research process, and produce a very interesting research that adds to a wide array of literature that is already talking about it here about Proposition 13 and its effects in the region. But I think we give it a more unique economist flavor that, even though it's the foundation of everything we talk about, sometimes it's kind of forgotten. The proper land economics of the problem sometimes is not really discussed too much. We want to contribute to that, to try to bring back those dialogues on pure land economics of the problem.
Mhm.
Well, Professor Garza, Professor Navarro Martinez, thank you so much for joining me today. I was thrilled to get to read the research products, the work that you all have produced. The topic that you looked into is very close to our mission and our focus, and it did absolutely feel like you have moved the needle in terms of our understanding of the effects of Proposition 13 and then this really exciting hypothesis about split rate taxation in the state. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Support.